June 23rd, 2022 Executive Committee meeting is now called to order at 12:04 p.m. I will call the roll. First Vice Chair Geisinger.
Here.
Second Vice Chair Catlin.
Here.
Secretary Sloan.
Here.
Treasurer Whitmore.
Present.
And Busick is here as well. We have a few other directors present. We have Director Rivera Malpiedi. We have Director Doug Tisdale. We have Director Shelley Cook and Director Eric Davidson. I don't think I missed any other directors. And we have a whole lot of staff. We have our General Manager and CEO, Deborah Johnson. Where did you go? I know I saw you. There you are. We've got our General Counsel, Melanie Snyder, Board Office Manager, Barbara McManus. We've got Board Office Ty Shrey. Who else? Anyway, we've got a bunch of staff people here. Thank you all for coming today. So I'd like to open this up first to public comment. For anyone who would like to address the committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current or immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not already done so, please either raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone. Staff will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. If you are dialed in, press *6 to toggle your mute settings. Please bear in mind that by participating in this process, you are being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, then your comments will need to be submitted in writing. If any speaker has documentation or reference materials for the committee, or if any member of the public would like to submit written comments, please email those materials to the board office at the following email address: rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. During public comment, the committee will not offer comments or responses. Directors or staff may contact speakers following their comments if they raise matters that lend themselves to follow-up. Speakers should begin their remarks by stating their names, and each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak. Ms. McManus, do we have any speakers in the queue?
We have 2 attendees and no speakers.
Okay, and were there any emailed comments received?
No external emails.
So with no one wishing to speak during the public comment period, I will now close the public comment period and move forward. We have 2 recommended action items on the agenda. As a reminder to the committee and meeting attendees, recommended actions passed by the executive committee, whether unanimous or not, will be included under the recommended action section of the board meeting agenda. This will allow the full board the opportunity to discuss the items should they have any questions or comments. Our first recommended action item is for the board of directors to reappoint 2 RTD Citizen Advisory Committee CAC members to additional 3-year terms, to appoint 4 new members to 3-year terms, and to appoint 1 new member to a 2-year term. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Director Geisinger is a movement and Whitmore is a second. Great. Is there any discussion on this recommended action item? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Are there any no votes on this recommended action item? And seeing none, that moves forward from the executive committee with unanimous consent. The second recommended action item is for the board of directors to approve the proclamation for CRL Associates, Inc. for their contributions made to the Regional Transportation District. And is there a motion?
So moved.
That's Whitmore. Is there a second? And Kat. And is there any discussion on this item? Director Catlin, did you want to speak? No? Okay. You kind of went like this. I thought you were signaling me. Okay. With no discussion, any further discussion, call for the vote. Are there any no votes on this action item? None. Okay, that moves forward out of the executive committee with unanimous consent. Next is our June board meeting review. Everybody has seen the June board meeting agenda, and I will need, well, hang on one second. Before I ask for the motion, I will ask Ms. McManus the following question. Pardon me, that wasn't the question. I contacted, Director Deschel contacted me and he is going to want the Allied Universal contract removed from the recommended action for discussion at the board meeting. Do we want to remove that now from the agenda, or should he make that request at the board meeting? He's fine either way. You're still on mute if you're speaking.
All right, I will speak then. I think we should accommodate Director Deschel by removing it now rather than making him take board time to do it.
Okay. First
Point of
Vice Chair
order, Mr.
Geisinger.
Chairman.
Yeah.
And I recognize I'm not a committee member, so
That's
maybe a
fine.
point of order is out of order, but nonetheless, you're saying not remove from the agenda, remove from
The consent
unanimous
agenda,
consent agenda.
correct, and to make it a recommended under the recommended action section.
Thank you.
Sorry if I misspoke. And by the way, you're out of order. First Vice Chair Geisinger.
Well, that might get to what my question was. Is it on the unanimous consent agenda now? I guess it is.
It is.
Okay,
yes.
yeah. No, I agree. Let's take it off.
Okay, and Ms. McManus, is that okay? Can we do that? Just shift it?
Yes, it's
Okay.
appropriate. It's appropriate to be moved forward to the recommended action through this committee.
Okay, and do we need a motion from this committee to make that happen? Or not?
No,
Okay, so now I will ask for a motion to move the June board meeting agenda as amended to the board meeting on June 20th. Is there a motion to approve that agenda?
So moved.
Catlin, second? Is there a second? I'm sorry, Director Geisinger, or did you?
Oh, I'll weit for the second and then I'll
Okay.
second it and then I'll.
Okay, you'll
I'll
second.
have some
Okay.
questions.
So we had, I think it was Catlin and Geisinger. And is there any discussion? First Vice Chair Geisinger, discussion?
Yeah, I do. I'm trying to find my spot in the, here it is. So we're discussing the board meeting and moving it forward, and if we have the revised delegation of authority. Okay, that's a separate, we're gonna discuss that separately, right?
Right, that's only on
I
this discussion item at this time. That will
Okay.
come forward in the July meeting cycle for approval.
Great, thanks.
Any further discussion on the motion to move the agenda forward as revised? Seeing none, are there any no votes to move this forward? Seeing none, that moves forward with the unanimous consent of the executive committee. We're going to move now on to discussion items, and we have 6 discussion items on our agenda today. First is the government relations report. General Manager and CEO Johnson, did you want to address this?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to all of you executive committee members and other board members that are assembled this afternoon. Deborah Johnson, General Manager and CEO. I'm going to provide a brief update on government relations activities as Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer, is out of the office today. So really quickly, at the federal level, the primary focus has been for us on facilitating the return of the credit risk premium from the U.S. Department of Transportation. All documentation and requested information have been submitted to DOT, and RTD expects the return in the very near future. Code word for we'll wait, but we've done everything we're supposed to do in relationship to that, and have had our federal lobbyists and our delegation working diligently, as well as the support of FTA as well. At the state level, the General Assembly is out of regular session. So the one element I'd like to touch upon is that Chair Busick and I are scheduled to present to the Transportation Legislation Review Committee on September 20th. I encourage the board to attend if your schedules allow. You'll receive more information pertaining to the time and location, most likely in early September. And then lastly, at the local level, Michael Davies and General Counsel Snyder have been coordinating with the county clerks and the Secretary of State's office on the board proposal to provide zero fare transit in conjunction with the November 2022 general election. Feedback has been positive from both the clerks and the Secretary of State's office. One specific recommendation from the clerks is a preference to not wait until actual election day as a primary goal, as the clerks are promoting early voting. A tentative suggestion from the clerks that will be further discussed after the primary election, which is June 28th, because the meeting hasn't taken place because they're focused on the primary. And so meeting is going to happen thereafter, is to consider zero fare for the National Vote Early Day on October 28th to promote and encourage voting, as well as the general election on November 8th. The chair and I did have a brief conversation about this, but this will be more fleshed out once this meeting occurs with the appropriate representatives. And then included in the discussion with the clerks will be clear information on the existing process for counties to partner with RTD and place voter drop boxes on RTD property as well. So with that, Mr. Chair, that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that report. Does any member of the committee or any board member present have any questions for GM CEO Johnson? Seeing none, we'll move forward. Thanks for that report. Next up is process and timeline for potential amendments to the bylaws. Ms. McManus, are you going to take this one? Is this the administrative stuff we talked about?
Yes, I can start this off.
Great.
So there were some administrative changes that were proposed at the time that we were approving the new meeting structure that was brought forward by Director Tisdale and Director Cook. Those items were pulled. At this point, we have asked Director Geisinger and Director Sloan to look at those changes to see if they feel at this time they're still appropriate to move forward. And then we also met Director Sloan, myself, Director Geisinger, and General Counsel Melanie Schneider to speak about the best way to approach the changes in all of the governance documents. And what we had discussed was making the administrative changes and then proposed substantive changes in the bylaws first, and then trickling those items down to the governance manual, the board governance manual and the board operating guidelines. There was some discussion as to whether or not those additional 2 documents brought value forward, and whether we should move forward with all 3 of those documents or we should bring that to the board for discussion. So at this point, I could pass it off to Director Sloan or Director Geisinger for them to speak on what they have done to date.
Great. Do either of you wish to talk about the process and timeline for potential amendments to the bylaws? I know we have 2 other discussion items coming forward, the updates to the governance manual and the informal director meetings, but we'll address those separately if that's okay.
You go, Marjorie.
I was asking you to go, but yeah, thank you, Barbara. That summed it up. Mostly, we realize what a tangled web our governance documents are. And all of them need improvement, simplification, common language, which they didn't have. So after we looked at the proposed administrative changes, which staff brought forward and undoubtedly have merit, we didn't really opine on those at all. We started considering the idea that perhaps substantive issues should come first, and then later any administrative changes, because the substantive issues are things that the board is interested in, specifically the idea of informal meetings. And that originally started not with the bylaws, but with the manual for, how we do proceed. Barbara's indicated she believes it should be in the bylaws, and that's fine too. It was outside the scope of Director Geisinger's and mine's brief, but it seems like that is something that should go forward. It was discussed in the retreat. The idea of informal meetings would improve efficiency of the board, and particularly now when it seems that the board is being asked to go to local officials, concerning the situation at Denver Union Station and the Zero Fare Month. And when there are overlapping jurisdictions with one group of elected officials, it seems if the affected representatives should at least get together first and have a common approach to, for instance, the Jefferson County commissioners. Another reason to go forward with this is it avoids the serial email problem that the Douglas County School Board got itself embroiled in. So we proposed a very general paragraph allowing flexible, informal meetings, and you received that. Thank you to Barbara for sending that out. And I would suggest that that goes forward first, whether it's a custom change that can go in one of the other governance documents or a bylaw change. Lynn, do you have items to add to that?
No, I not much. I think you did a great job. Thanks, Marjorie.
Great, thanks for that discussion. Director Rivera-Malpiedi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was looking at the documents about the informal gathering, and I have a couple of questions and maybe perhaps a couple of concerns in terms of if we informalize the ability for more than 3 board members to get together off-site. What are the ramifications for ADA compliance and security issues? Particularly in today's date, elected officials really need to be a little bit cautious about security and the diversity of folks who may attend those meetings. So I just wanted to know if there was any thought given to it, because I personally would not feel comfortable having a meeting in my community with other board members with no security, and that is not ADA compliant. So if someone could answer that for me, I'd be so appreciative. Thank you.
Great, thanks for the questions. First, Vice Chair Geisinger.
Thank you. And Ms. McManus and others have provided options for moving forward with security and some of those things. The idea is that it would be compliant with all relevant laws. So ADA compliance, wherever it is, needs to be accessible. And I think, that there are times that people may need or want security, and I think we take care of that at that point. I think that sometimes more than 2 of us show up at county meetings or public meetings of various sorts, and there's not security there. I guess my answer is that can be taken care of on an individual basis if the directors feel the need for security.
With all due respect, I'm not comfortable with that answer. And I guess the reason that I'm not comfortable with it is because I think there's so many components that come into play with this. And I think those commissioner meetings we go to and stuff, they are actually put out in the public that they're happening, and those get those things ready. What I'm most concerned about is just the sense of uneasiness in today's state around elected officials, number one. Number two, if I have a meeting in my community, you know, how much staff time is that going to take to staff it with security? And if I need interpretation in different languages, is that going to be taken into account? Because I won't know who will be showing up. And what compliance do I have to have in place to do a meeting out in the community with other directors that I wouldn't have the resources for that would be happening at a board office?
Any response from anyone?
Well, I just say that really it's not contemplating meetings in the community. I was just giving that as an example of, you know, where directors might show up in a situation. This is, you know, more like where, you know, several people who represent a specific county would like to get together and talk about how to work with their county officials or their county staff or something along those lines. And again, I think, you know, the idea is to make it so that we comply with all laws. Everybody has appropriate notice. You know, the minutes are recorded and all of those things. And Ms. McManus and her team have, you know, offered the option of security and you know, location and those things.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Thanks. Director Cook.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for letting me weigh in. As I recall, this came up when Marjorie proposed a meeting between herself and Peggy and me to prepare for a joint meeting with the Board of County Commissioners. And the idea was, I think, more than twofold, but to get on the same page and kind of have our act together to put our best foot forward as we met with the commissioners, identify what we'd want to talk about. But the reason we wanted to do it away from Blake, as I recall, was to kind of get a lay of the land where we'd be meeting with the commissioners and look at how the meeting room or the hearing room, whatever it was laid out. And then finally, Marjorie was proposing to, you know, prepare us a salad for lunch. And it was just a chance for board members to get to know one another. And in my experience, that's really beneficial, in a less than direct way, but in an important way as you go forward, getting to know your board members in a way that isn't so formal and that allows a more informal exchange of views and so forth. So thank you for letting me weigh in.
Thanks, Director Cook. Director Rivera-Malpiedi.
This will be the last thing, I promise. That's exactly my concern, is that we are now in 2022 in a completely different environment in the world. And I really fear that the spirit is great, but the reality is stark. And I personally would not feel comfortable as a board director to have a meeting in a home and having an informal luncheon, because it would be open to the public and I would not know who would show up at any given time and who could come back afterwards. And so that's really my concern. It probably is because I've worked so closely with the Denver Police Department for years, but I really would like to caution us on this side of just safety as opposed to the side of informal gatherings. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments. Director Cook, your hand is still up. Did you have any more to add? Thanks. Okay. Secretary Sloan.
Yeah, I really appreciate Angie's comments in this. We tried to make it flexible enough that it would meet the comfort level of any of the directors, whatever they felt was important, rather than a one size fits all for just a brief informal meeting. And that's a great reason to bring this up at this committee to see what the feelings of the other directors are. Angie has made her feelings, very valid feelings with her experience, plain, and it would be dependent on the other directors whether this goes forward or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Rivera-Malpiedi.
I know I said that was last time, but now this is the last time.
Okay.
I would respectfully disagree with that. And I know I'm only one board member out of 15 board members, but I think that the operative word for me that I heard Director Sloan was that this would be flexible to meet the needs of different folks depending on who they are. And I think that's one of the reasons we get into trouble is if we don't have a uniform, clear, defined plan of action for every single one of us that is by the book, then I think we're going to be treading on in a gray area that could come back. So I would just caution the executive committee on that. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments. I've got a question for our general counsel. I know she's here. So there she is. I see that. So with the example that was given when Director Cook spoke, there was going to be a meeting with 3 directors at a Jefferson County office somewhere that I presume is accessible and has security. And then subsequently, there was going to be an informal gathering of those same 3 directors at Marjorie Sloan's house for lunch. My understanding of the notice requirements of public meetings is the first part is a public meeting you need to provide notice for. The second part may not be if you're not discussing RTD business. Is that fair to say?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Melanie Snyder, General Counsel. Yes, you are correct. So to the extent you have 3 directors that are discussing board or RTD business, yes, you need to follow the open meetings law, which requires 24 hours notice of the items to be discussed, the agenda items to be discussed. If you have a purely social gathering where no one's going to be discussing RTD business or board business or matters to come before the board, that doesn't need to follow the same restrictions. And I should say, pardon me, in the first instance, you also need to, in addition to notice, you have to make that meeting accessible and open to the public. The second meeting, you would not need to.
Right. Okay. Okay. So I'm a fan of flexibility to the as long as we're complying with the law when it comes to accessibility and notice and things like that. And I appreciate Director Rivera-Malpietti's comments and concerns about security and all that. And I suppose directors that share those concerns, and there are likely many, will not conduct a meeting where there's not security. Anyway. That's good. Any more discussion? Ms. McManus.
Yes, so I just wanted to clarify the example that Director Sloan brought forward, because what she was proposing is that the 3 directors at her house having a planning meeting that would bring forward a more formal meeting with the powers that be in their local governments. So it would not be a social luncheon in the vein that it was originally scheduled. It was actually a planning meeting with 3 directors. So I just wanted to clarify that, because this is where the lines start getting blurred with what is happening and what's not happening. And I did, along with the language that Directors Geisinger and Sloan wanted to bring forward regarding informal meetings of the board, I also sent a document that the board office prepared that outlines the current customs and costs of meetings back live, all of the different scenarios with ad hoc committees, so on and so forth, and what the current protocols are, as well as on the last page was a proposal of how I think these smaller meetings could best be managed. I know that the directors want something a little less informal, so perhaps there's middle ground. I just don't know what that looks like yet. But when we prepare to bring this forward to the whole board, I just would hope that all of the details were fleshed out and brought forward, and all of the information is being brought forward, not just the idea that, the directors could meet more informally, because I think there just is so much more to it than that. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments, General Counsel Snyder.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. McManus, for that clarification. And I just wanted to also clarify that the advice I was providing was based on the two hypotheticals that the chair was proposing, not the scenario that Ms. McManus just described.
And thanks for that. And my assumption, and that's always dangerous, would be that if this process moves forward, the meeting where business is discussed at Secretary Sloan's house would probably not happen because you might not be ADA accessible, so you would have had to do something different, I suppose. But again, I'm a fan of flexibility, and I'm a fan of directors being able to meet somewhere other than Blake, because we live outside of Blake and we conduct our business outside of Blake. And to the extent we can, and we need to change the title from informal director meetings to something else, because they're not informal. They're formal in that we comply with the formalities of the law, correct? So let's call them something different, because they're really not an informal meeting. That sounds more like, oh, let's just get together and have some coffee and talk business. So I don't think that's what's envisioned. Anyway, any more discussion? First, Vice Chair Geising.
Thank you very much. You know, Ms. McManus raises a good point that they had offered, that staff had written up a memo with a number of, questions about security and recording and things like that. And I guess I had thought from the conversation with some in the board office those were options. And but she's right. We need to figure out exactly how we're moving this forward. So I would like to see, and I don't know, what we need to do, if we need to do anything to amend something, that we move forward the informal meeting proposal. And certainly I understand your idea of changing the name, but we move that forward with the suggestions from the board office of ways it could be done if people have security issues or want to do it at Blake and those sorts of things, but keeping those as an option, which is, again, what I understood. I wasn't, but maybe I wasn't sure there. Maybe I wasn't right. Thanks.
Any further discussion? I think we've just covered 3 topics, right? We covered the process and time. I'm going to get back to the process and timeline because I'm not sure on the timeline. The governance manual and the informal meetings. Anything further on informal meetings and governance manual updates? So, okay, cool. How about timeline? I'll turn this back to Secretary Sloan, First Vice Chair Geising. What do you envision for a timeline in getting something to the board for review and consideration?
I'm going to toss this to Lynn. Yeah.
First Vice Chair Geisinger, go ahead. The answer.
I guess whoever speaks first gets to assign the other one. I guess it's been around. People have been asking us, we'd like to move it forward soon, but to the extent there is some lack of clarification about the staff memo and what we're passing here, I think it's fine to postpone it and maybe clarify that and get a recommended action and move it forward to the board in July would be my recommendation.
Okay, so we'll see more to come, right? Is that fair to say?
Does that sound right, Marjorie?
The timeline sounds right, but other than changing the title, I'm not sure our very general paragraph needs much change. It maybe is, here, I keep tossing things to other people, maybe the board office about potential ways to incorporate security and IT if the people involved in the meeting request it.
Yeah, or a recommended action that just makes clear, this is the proposal and these are the options, offered from the board office for people who want to use them, something like that.
Okay, Director Rivera-Melpietty.
Yeah, I would just also add on to your list ADA compliance, and because I think that will be a really huge issue for us.
Yeah. Great. Second Vice Chair Catlin.
Thank you, Chair. This probably goes without saying, but I would encourage all board members that if they are going to plan a smaller meeting, that to make sure that the board office is engaged in the discussion early on so that they don't have to react.
Great. Any further comments or discussion on these topics? And Directors Geisinger and Sloan, do you think you have enough comments to move forward? Yeah. Good. Thumbs up. Excellent. Let's move on to the next discussion item, and that is revised delegation of authority. And I'm sure we all know the background on this. The delegation that was in the packet was drafted by Director Tisdale and myself with input from Director Geisinger. I know I've had some calls and emails from other directors indicating thumbs up and so forth, but as noted in the red line version of that resolution, the revised delegation would update the current delegation of purchasing and contracting, budget transfer and settlement authority consistent with the board bylaws, the RTD Act, regulations published by the Federal Transit Administration, and the board's historical practices. And examples of the contracts excluded by the delegation include safety and security, local, state, and federal lobbying and government relations, contracts for consultants providing public outreach, telephone town halls, or soliciting community feedback, and contracts for internal and external audit functions. Is there any discussion, anything that anyone would like to add or change with the proposed language in the revised delegation? I'll take comments now. Okay, General Counsel Snyder.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I, certainly want to defer to the director's discussion. I think it's really important to have these conversations. As we've talked about in the past, the board has all of the statutory authority to be able to make these decisions. And, you have delegated away some of that authority in the prior delegation and then the one that was most recently passed in March. I have a number of questions because I just want to make sure that we're really clear and that staff has really clear direction about what you intend to be within scope or outside the scope, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so the first category is any contract dealing with the provision of safety and security services. So the original delegation, under that original delegation, contracts like the Allied Security Services contract were part of, did not have to go to the board. When the 2022 delegation was approved, that was specifically excluded. So that is the reason, for example, why you saw, or the board saw, the committee saw the Allied contract that came to the board. So my question is, is the intention to include or to limit that to allied type services? Or when you say safety, does that mean we have a whole safety division and we have a whole security division? So are we talking about all contracts that those divisions touch? So in safety, for example, we have our safety management system. We have a Cordy software system that we're working on right now that is going to manage all of our safety management, or manage a lot of our safety management processes. On the security side, are you intending that to be just contracted services like Allied, or were you envisioning that, for example, our chief would bring to you the secondary employment contracts that we have with other law enforcement agencies across the district? Are we intending to include just physical security or cybersecurity? Does that give you a flavor of the questions? I think there are a number of contracts that we have in these categories. And so I just want us to be really clear.
Yeah, and I think my impression was the actual services themselves, the Allied contract, not ministerial acts such as, minor contracts for technical or equipment or things like that. If you have more, why don't you put those into an email to the executive committee and we can go through that and hash that out. So, but I understand that there can be some confusion as to what that means. Director Tisdale, do you have any comment on that? You help with this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I agree with your assessment that we were principally dealing with the actual provision of security services. And I recognize that we often combine safety and security. Safety really deals with things such as rail safety and bus safety of the vehicles and so forth, and the Federal Transit Administration, Federal Road Administration address those topics. We really are talking about security, and we really are talking about the services. My thought would be that it would include the actual provision of protective services, be that by Allied or by other police agencies contracting with the RTD for provision of protective or security services.
Yeah, agreed. That's what we were thinking along those lines. So we can clean up the language, General Counsel, if you think that would be beneficial.
I think that would be helpful. And I think just giving, allowing staff to provide some additional information just so that the board can make a really reasoned decision. The same thing would go for consultant services, some of that language. We just want to make sure you have a sense of what the board would be taking on with respect to volume and types of contracts as well.
Great. I appreciate that. And I will continue to work with Director Tisdale and others to tighten up that language so that there's no questions. So great. Anybody else have any comment on the delegation of authority? No. Okay, good. Let's see, timeline and recruitment, last discussion item. So it's the timeline and recruitment process for board office executive managers. So as we've discussed before, our board office manager, Barbara McManus, is going to be leaving. And I don't know that there's a date certain, but I'm thinking it's the end of the year to the first part of next year. And either way, we as the executive committee need to get to work on discussing and putting in place the recruitment process. So one of the first things I think we need to think about is whether we will use internal RTD services to look for candidates, or if we will hire an outside consultant firm to help us find qualified candidates. If either way, there will be, I'm sure, a budget impact, and we'll need to make sure this is something that Mr. McLeod has scope for in our budget. But I guess in a general sense, what are thoughts of members of the committee with regard to doing the search with internal resources versus external resources?
Mr. Chair.
Director Whitmore, thank you.
Dumb question. What's been prior practice?
It's a good question. It's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. Ms. McManus?
I bet she would know.
I bet she knows.
Myself as an internal employee before, we went through the regular recruitment process through RTD with some, external. We went through the APTA website, all of the normal external venues that we would advertise. So prior to me, when Executive Director Paula Perdue was hired, I understand that they had a third party, but it wasn't my understanding that they went out to RFQ. So I don't know if that point in time, they had a contract with someone that they were working with that was external, but I know that there was some external entity that helped in that search prior to me. I know that, depending on the position, RTD as a general rule has done it both ways. Right now, there is no senior manager in the HR department. And I know that some of the other roles that they are going out to hire for, they are using a third-party vendor. So, it really is under the discretion of the board to decide, do they want to go through the agency and go through the normal process? Or do they, want to widen the scope and, do a national search to bring someone into this position, which is, the second one of two positions that the board does manage. So that's the information I have to offer at this point.
Great. Any other comments from other directors? I guess I'd have go ahead, Director Whitmore, finish up.
Well, maybe this is inappropriate, but we have Mr. Ford and Deborah who have worked for other transit agencies over the years, and perhaps they're not comfortable answering this, but do either of you recall processes for this type of position, albeit maybe a bit different, and how that was handled at your former places of employment?
General Manager, CEO Johnson.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Whitmore, for the question. I think it boils down to what the board's preference is collectively. There's a myriad of reasons while somebody may basically retain the services of a talented management entity as relates to placing people in specific jobs. There could be market issues, so it just runs the gamut in reference to what it is that you all prefer. Because as you know, even with the position in which I possess, some agencies choose to do that internally and others choose to, retain the services of an executive recruitment firm. So it really is contingent upon what you're seeking and what you need assistance with. If there was a desire to help, craft, a job description and identify a profile that'd be optimal, and one wanted to use, services, or I should say systems such as behavioral assessments and cognitive assessments, an entity can do that for you. That could be done internal. So it just depends on what you all desire. I've seen it both ways. And I've been at 7 other transit agencies and have talked to people and know people in that space. So it just depends.
Thanks for the clarity. Second Vice Chair Catlin.
Thanks. You mentioned that we do not have a senior manager in HR. And I was just wondering what the capacity of our Human Resources Department is at this point, because we may, in fact, have that decision made for us just by virtue of the time and effort it would take for someone in HR to pull that together.
Right. GM CEO Johnson, would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, so just point of clarification. Thank you very much for that comment, Director Catlin. We do have someone acting in that stead, and we do have people there because we are handling human resources responsibilities on a day-to-day basis. And the individual who is acting in that stead is quite capable of that role. So I just want to ensure, recognizing this is a public meeting, that we are not rudderless as it relates to human resources. But more specifically, it gets back to the point, once again, what is it that you all want to do as we go forward? It also is contingent upon timing. This is one position in which we're recruiting. Are you looking to do a national search? Are you looking? So there's a lot of different questions, I believe. If I'm hoping I'm not overstepping, but I think this committee needs to discern what do you all want to do, because I think as relates to what you agree upon collectively, then a decision can be made about the direction in which you should go relative to who would recruit for said position. So I think that could be advantageous as well. And if you're going to leverage different entities, as I said before, if you're going to redo a job description, all of those factors have to be considered, I would say, before you discern who's going to be the one that carries the ball over the finish line. Thank you.
Great, and thanks for those points. That's good to know. First Vice Chair Geisinger.
Thanks very much. That's all great information. And it made me think that maybe we could kind of start to move forward in terms of when our timeline is and all of that. I think several of us are going to the Transit Board Member and Board Manager Summit that I believe is being run by Director Tisdale. at the end of July. And if we can kind of start the process of defining what we're looking for and maybe seeing what it would cost to go out to, a recruiter or something. And that might be a place where we could gain some more knowledge on this topic. Am I right on that, Director Tisdale?
Yes, you are, absolutely. And we'll have wonderful resources available to us there in Salt Lake at the TBM Summit.
Great. That might be the way to go. I know the timeline is, it's going to be on us before you know it. And I'd really like to get some decision made by September as to whether we're soliciting for a recruiter, or if we're going to do this internally, having a job description, salary range, et cetera, ready to go. So internally, and then of course, a decision whether we're going to go even internally on a national search or try to keep it more regional in scope. But okay, so those are things we're going to have to think about. Any other discussion, any other thoughts on this matter? I want to kick this down the road forever. So it seems like we're kicking it down to the APTA conference, but when you all come out of that conference in our next meeting, we need decisions. So keep that in mind. Anything further to come before the committee? Are there any other matters to come before the committee? The first Vice Chair Geisinger.
Thank you. I just finished reading through the document that we were sent on the mobility plan for the future. And there's a lot of good information there. And somewhere I don't think there's a PDF for electrification that isn't yet attached, and a plan to provide more information on partnerships and some really good information. I thought that the study session we had was a good start, but pretty high level. And so I guess my question and my hope is that we'll be following that up with more specifics that are based in the writing, since we didn't get it before the session.
Thanks for those comments. Are you looking for a response?
Sure. If maybe Ms. Johnson could tell us what the next step. Are we going to do another study session? For instance, there's the electrification piece. Well, like as I said, there's several things that seem like they're important for the board to understand and address.
Thanks. GM CEO Johnson.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. First, Vice Chair Geisinger, and for Chair Busick for asking me to respond. So a couple of things as we talk about where we are, recognizing that the mobility plan for the future is the plan as relates to the whole electrification aspect. There's a transitional process that we have to do, and I think we touched upon that during the course of the study session. So there's work that's still underway. And as I shared with Chair Busick, he actually requested that we have another study session specific to that in and around the fall. And I shared with him as we look at where we are collectively, recognizing that we've only had, operations really on a limited operating environment. We probably will have that information readily available in, November, December, because the consultant had to go back to the drawing board as it related to that and the impacts of COVID. But to be more specific with your questions, I can double back and get information from staff. When we talk about the partnerships, you and I have spoken about that. We are working on that as relates to a call for projects and how we go about doing it and how much money needs to be allocated. So while this is a plan, those certain aspects aren't going to be necessarily all itemized and outlined, because we need that direction from the board, which is policy. As we go forward in reference to what we're doing. So it may appear as if I'm dancing around your question, but you're giving me some aspects of it. But I think, as I was saying, as we go forward, this is the framework, and those are pieces as we decide where we're going futuristically. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I guess I'm not clear. So are you saying I came out of the study session feeling like there was still a lot more information we needed, and we got some of it later that night, but still there's more there. So are you saying you'll be bringing those different pieces to us, or will we have another study session in July or September or something? Or I'm just trying to figure out how we address all of these different issues. And
I will need to double back with my staff, to be honest with you, because we had the study session and then I went out of the country and I just got back. So I haven't had a chance to confer in the interest of full disclosure, but as we go forward, the point of the matter is that there wouldn't be another study session with the consultants, let me be clear, right? Because we extended that contract. So that would be something that we can do. And if that's the board's desire, the communique that we sent out is if there were questions and additional needs, if you guys could synthesize that, because that'll help chart the path forward in relationship to what it is that we need to do collectively.
okay, and I will write a letter and an email in terms of that. You know, another piece I would just mention is that I know they did a lot of analysis on Tabor and the sales tax. I saw their analysis that on Tabor that was given. But when it came to us in that study session, it was, we didn't see any of that. And those to me are really critical. You know, if we're going to suggest we go back for a sales tax or debrucing, you know, seeing, as you well know, it's a political world around that I'd sure like to see what the consultants and the team have come up with on that.
Understood. And Mr. Chair, if I can respond to that, that's a clear-cut example, because there is the Tabor Ad Hoc Committee, and I know Director Cook is here. And as we look at that information, we made it clear to the consultant that we did have an ad hoc committee. So those are the policy issues that I'm talking about. The board would have to decide that wouldn't come as part of the mobility plan for the future per se, but this is laying the framework for it as we go forward.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Let's see, we've got Treasurer Whitmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think the only couple of meetings that I've missed on this board have been because of the Colorado Municipal League, which I attend on my day job behalf. But I had visited briefly with the chair a couple of years ago, and we didn't really move on this item. And we talked briefly yesterday to make sure he understood I would not be in attendance. But, you know, we've got directors Tisdale, Sloan, Busick, and Cook, and myself that have been participants in CML over the years in our old roles as city council members and or mayors. And I just think it'd be really beneficial to send maybe Mr. Davies to the conference in the future, Deborah, or a few board members. There's just a myriad of opportunities to visit informally or formally with leaders that are very active with RTD, some that were on the accountability committee and so on and so forth. So I think it's an opportunity that we should take advantage of. Good news, bad news. You know, this event has been held in resort communities for many, many years in a row, as all the former office holders and municipalities know. The bad news is that's going to cease for those of us that attend regularly, because it is a nice breath of fresh air to go up into the mountains. But however, the next 3 years, the events will be on the Front Range, and 2 of the next 3 years, the events will be within our, our RTD district. The location next year is the Gaylord out in Aurora, and maybe, I don't know if that's in or out of the district, but I presume it's in the district. And then Loveland, and then I think the next year is back to Westminster. Our local government affairs folks, Ms. Watson and Ms. Webster, are here. Now, obviously, they're here on behalf of other clients, but I did visit with them briefly last night in an event. So, I mean, we are probably 40 or 50% of the way of being participants. So I would just recommend that we look at that in the future with a couple of staff members, and certainly wouldn't have to attend the whole event. And with lodging taken out of the equation, it won't be a big cost for any of us to attend. So just a recommendation to put on our planning for next summer, Ms. Johnson, if you think that's appropriate. Thank you, Vince. Mr. Chair.
Yeah. That's a great suggestion. I think we could have a good impact. We've got a captive audience of elected officials. So let's see, we've got Secretary Sloan. Go ahead. You're on mute.
I need to answer in advance if there are any questions. My response will be I can't answer that right now, but I thought since we're all gathered, I would like to let this group, and this came up when CEO GM Johnson was out of the country, so I haven't had a chance to connect with her yet. But I talked to an old friend, Lily Griego, who she's a Wheat Ridge District M resident. She's worked as the contact person for Senator Bennett. She was in charge of the census for our area, and now she is the Region 8 Director of Health and Human Services. So we were talking, and you should know you don't just talk to Lily and she says, well, let's talk that over further. She gets excited about things and picks up the ball and runs with it. But she sees a role for the Department of Health and Human Services in behavioral health and mental health, and the connection with transit, as well as the health effects of reducing greenhouse gas through transit. She would very much like to get involved, particularly now, the now infamous Washington Post article is top in her mind, and she would like to work with RTD in determining a path forward for a role with the Department of Health and Human Services. I don't know anything more than I've just said, but I think it's exciting and there are possibilities there. And Deborah, we can talk later. Yeah.
No, great. Thanks for that opportunity. And yeah, I would ask you and GM CEO Johnson to get together sometime and flesh that out and see if there are opportunities for them to work with RTD. That would be great. Second Vice Chair Gatlin, please go ahead.
Thank you. I really appreciated Troy's suggestion about becoming active at CML. And I was going to just tag along and say that there may also be some opportunities at Colorado County's CCI. And I think particularly because of our discussion with multiple directors in one county, that might be a really good way for us to provide liaison to our county commissioners.
Great, thanks for that comment. And I do believe there are now 2 organizations for counties. I know Broomfield got out of CCI and joined a different county organization. So something to look at. Director Cook.
I agree with all that in terms of connecting and engaging with CML as it meets every year. That's just a wonderful opportunity. Same thing for CCI and the other organization. I just wanted to ask if it's possible ahead of meetings where we're taking up some really important stuff like the mobility plan for the future or the SOP, if you have backup and you can get it to us earlier, GM CEO, I'm one of those people who kind of plods through stuff and is better prepared if I have a chance to look it over ahead of time. So I would just say when we can, ahead of a meeting, have all the material that you have prepared, that would be really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. GM CEO Johnson.
Yes, thank you so much, Director Cook. And yes, most definitely. I believe this is under other matters, so I didn't know this was going to be on the agenda.
No, I just raised it because it had come up sort of tangentially as Director Greisen was talking. Sorry about that.
Okay, no worries, no worries. I thought I missed something, so that's why I commented. But of course, if we can prepare materials, we will. We'll work with the board office. Ms. McManus and I have a recurring meeting, and so more than happy to do that. And we review the executive committee agenda. So Chair, maybe I could work with you on that. If we could get some of these items in advance, if people have other matters, perhaps, then everybody will be better suited to have an engaged conversation, I believe.
Perfect.
And I'll be able to respond as opposed to tap dancing. Thank you.
Good tap dancing. Ms. McManus.
So I had my hand up earlier, Chair, before we moved on from the bylaws discussion. So when we were speaking about the timeline, we really wanted to try to articulate a timeline for bringing any and all changes forward in the bylaws. What Director Geisinger and Sloan have articulated is that they want to bring forward their one item in the July cycle. So are there any thoughts as to, my suggestion was that we would bring that forward as a bylaw change. Do we have any sort of consensus on that? I just have to make the directors successful in how they bring this forward, so that we have all the information for all the directors to understand. We had spoken in our smaller meeting about bringing this forward to the full board as a discussion item. So it sounds to me, if we're bringing it forward in the July cycle, would we have a discussion item in one of the committee meetings, which is really not a committee of the whole? Do we have a discussion about this, on the board meeting agenda, which we have already just approved? Or do we just bring this forward as an action item next month in executive committee with this single item change in the bylaws to move forward, and then worry about a holistic timeline with all of the governance documents down the road? I just need some clarity for my office as to how we're moving that forward.
Directors Geisinger or Sloan, do you want to address that now, or would you rather have this discussion offline?
Well, since I noticed I'm already unmuted, I think, maybe a phone conversation with Directors Geisinger and the office staff might be more helpful than getting the executive committee involved in how to proceed in terms of details.
Well,
That sounds good, and this is kind of your thing, so why don't you guys set that up, but please no later than like Monday or Tuesday. Let's keep moving, keep the momentum.
Okay.
All right. Ms. McManus, is that helpful?
That is helpful with the single item that they want to bring forward, but it doesn't give me any guidance as to how you want to move forward with all of the governance documents moving forward. It just gives me guidance on that one item.
Well, Director Sloan and Geisinger, I would ask you, you're kind of taking this charge on, so why don't you continue to have that discussion as well, not just the one item. Let's get everything nailed down.
Fine.
Okay, so you're expanding our mission to include bylaws at this time. Is that right?
If you're only bringing one action item forward and not addressing the rest of or anything else, that's fine. It's fine. But I guess Ms. McManus just wants to know if that's the case or not. So you guys will have that conversation and resolve that. I appreciate it. Any other matters come before the executive committee? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.